The engines went silent. Through the oval window of row 2, Zara Bennett watched a sleek black Gulfstream G650 roll into position, blocking the taxiway completely. The Bennett Tech Industries logo gleamed under the California sun. Around her, passengers craned their necks, confused by the sudden stop. Beside her flight attendant, Diane Hartwell's face drained of color as the radio crackled to life. "This is Bennett Private Aircraft. We have a situation regarding passenger safety." Zara's lips curved into the smallest smile. Diane's hand, which moments ago had gripped Zara's shoulder, demanding she move to economy, now trembled violently. The radio continued. "Requesting immediate communication with Captain Mills regarding civil rights violation aboard Flight 447. Every head in first class turned toward Zara. The 17-year-old girl they had just watched being humiliated suddenly became someone entirely different. Someone whose father owned the jet currently holding their departure hostage. Before we dive into how this incredible moment came to be, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. Are you Team Zara, or do you think she overreacted? Hit that like button if you believe standing up against discrimination matters, and subscribe because this story takes turns you will not see coming. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. Now let us go back 3 hours and see exactly how a routine flight turned into a billionaire's declaration of war. Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Tuesday afternoon. Zara Bennett navigated through the crowds with practiced ease, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling around her neck. She wore a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans, and white sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth. That was intentional. She had a point to prove, not just to herself, but to her father, Trevor Bennett, who had built a $4.7 billion tech empire from nothing. Independence mattered to Zara. She was 17, brilliant, and determined to get into MIT on her own merit, not her father's money or connections. That is why she had not told him about today's interview in New York. She had used her own savings to book this ticket deliberately, choosing not to use any family accounts that might alert him. The check-in counter proved to be her first obstacle. Zara handed over her boarding pass and identification to a blonde woman whose name tag read Crystal. The agent's smile, bright and welcoming for the passenger, before Zara flickered and died. Crystal's eyes moved from the first-class ticket to Zara's casual outfit, then to her face. The pause lasted 3 seconds too long. "Is this your ticket?" Crystal asked, her tone shifting to something careful and suspicious. Zara felt the familiar tightening in her chest, but kept her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am. I booked it 3 weeks ago." Crystal's fingers flew over her keyboard, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This says first class." It was not a question, but an accusation wrapped in corporate politeness. "I'm aware," Zara replied, forcing a smile. "Is there a problem?" Crystal glanced at her co-worker, a silent conversation passing between them. "We need to verify this booking. It seems unusual." The word hung in the air. Unusual. Code for a black teenager should not have a first-class ticket. Zara pulled out her phone, navigating to her confirmation email while other passengers in line behind her shifted impatiently. She showed Crystal the screen complete with booking reference, purchase confirmation, and payment receipt. Crystal studied it with theatrical thoroughness before finally reluctantly printing her boarding pass. "Thank you for your patience," she said without warmth. No apology, no acknowledgement of the implication. Just the brittle courtesy of someone forced to do their job. The first-class lounge provided no sanctuary. Zara had barely settled into a leather armchair with her laptop when a security guard approached. He was older, with gray at his temples, and a belly that strained against his uniform. "Excuse me, miss. Can I see your boarding pass?" Zara looked up from her screen. Around the lounge, dozens of passengers sat unbothered. None of them were being questioned. She handed over her pass without argument, watching his eyes widen slightly at the first-class designation. "And your ID," he added. She provided that too. He studied both documents with unnecessary intensity, even pulling out a small flashlight to examine the boarding pass for signs of forgery. Satisfied, or perhaps disappointed at finding nothing wrong, he handed them back. "Thank you," he said, not meeting her eyes. 15 minutes later, a different security guard approached. Same question, same scrutiny, same humiliation. This time Zara felt her hands shake as she provided her documents. She wanted to scream to demand why she alone was being targeted, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Excellence is the best response to prejudice, baby girl. When they expect you to be angry, be dignified. When they expect ignorance, show brilliance. Make them question their assumptions by simply being undeniably excellent." So Zara swallowed her anger, answered politely, and returned to her laptop. But her fingers trembled on the keyboard, and the words on the screen blurred. She thought about calling her father, hearing his reassuring voice, but pride stopped her. She was trying to prove she could handle the world alone. Calling Daddy at the first sign of trouble felt like failure. Boarding began 30 minutes later. Zara joined the first-class line, positioning herself behind a businessman in an expensive suit and a couple who looked like they split their time between Aspen and Monaco. When she presented her boarding pass to the gate agent, she braced for another round of verification. It came. "First class?" the agent asked, her voice lilting up in question. "Yes," Zara confirmed, fighting exhaustion. How many times would she have to prove herself today? The agent scanned her pass, frowned at her screen, scanned it again. "Go ahead," she finally said, though her expression suggested Zara had somehow cheated the system. The jetway felt longer than it should have, each step weighted with the anticipation of what came next. Zara had flown first class before, always with her father, always insulated by his presence and the respect his name commanded. Today, she was just a black girl in a hoodie. The difference was stark. She stepped onto the aircraft and immediately appreciated the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin. Wide leather seats in a soft cream color, each with ample space and privacy. Overhead bins that actually had room. The subtle scent of expensive air freshener. Her seat, 2A, was in the front row by the window. Perfect. She could watch the clouds and mentally prepare for her interview. As Zara settled into her seat, stowing her backpack and pulling out her tablet, she noticed the flight attendant watching her. The woman was tall and slender, somewhere in her mid-40s, with auburn hair pulled into an immaculate bun. Her name tag identified her as Diane Hartwell. Diane's smile, which had been warm and genuine for the passengers in front of Zara, transformed into something tight and artificial. "Excuse me," Diane said, her voice honey-sweet, but with an edge underneath. "May I see your boarding pass?" Zara handed it over without comment, used to this routine by now. Diane examined it with the intensity of a gemologist inspecting a suspicious diamond. She looked from the pass to Zara, then back to the pass. "There seems to be some confusion," Diane announced, her voice carrying across the cabin. "This seat has been assigned to another passenger." Zara's stomach dropped. "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago. There must be a mistake in your system." Diane's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. "I will need to check with the gate. Please wait here." Here meant standing in the aisle as other passengers filed past their eyes, curious, some annoyed at the obstruction. Zara stood aside, pressing herself against an empty seat to let people through. Each person who passed seemed to judge her, to wonder what she had done wrong. Minutes ticked by. 5, then 10. Diane returned with a tablet, her expression set in false regret. "I have checked, and there has been a double booking situation. We are going to need to sort this out." Before Zara could respond, a new passenger appeared. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore was exactly what central casting would send for wealthy white woman of a certain age. She wore a cream Chanel suit, pearl earrings, and carried a Louis Vuitton bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect bob, and her makeup was flawless. She looked at the seat number, then at Zara, and her expression curdled. "This is my seat," Mrs. Whitmore announced with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in her life. 2A. I always sit in 2A. Diane immediately turned deferential. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. I am so sorry for the confusion. We are just sorting out a small issue." She shot Zara a look that clearly communicated who was expected to move. Zara pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I have my confirmation email right here. Seat 2A booked on November 15th, confirmed and paid in full." She held out her phone, but Diane barely glanced at it. "Email confirmations can be..." Diane paused delicately. "Unreliable. Mrs. Whitmore is a platinum member with over 3 million miles. I am sure we can find you a lovely seat in economy." The word economy landed like a slap. Around them, other passengers had stopped pretending not to watch. This was live entertainment, a conflict to break up the monotony of boarding. Mrs. Whitmore made a show of checking her own phone. "I have flown first class for 30 years. I know my seat when I see it." Her tone suggested that Zara's presence in first class was not just wrong, but somehow offensive to the natural order of things. Zara felt heat creeping up her neck, a mixture of humiliation and anger that threatened to choke her. "With respect, ma'am, I have documentation that this is my assigned seat. If there has been a double booking, which I doubt since the system would not allow that, then we need to check whose reservation came first. Mine is dated 3 weeks ago." Diane's face flushed. "Young lady, I do not appreciate your tone. I am trying to resolve this situation professionally." The irony of being accused of improper tone while being publicly accused of seat theft was not lost on Zara, but before she could respond, Diane turned and walked briskly toward the cockpit. Great. Now they were getting the captain involved. This was spiraling out of control fast. Mrs. Whitmore settled into a nearby seat with an exaggerated sigh, making sure everyone knew she was the victim of this inconvenience. She pulled out her phone and began texting furiously, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. Captain Roger Mills emerged from the cockpit a moment later. He was in his late 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that looked permanently stern. He wore his uniform with military precision, every button and crease perfect. He listened as Diane whispered urgently to him, both of them glancing repeatedly at Zara. Then he approached, and Zara knew immediately that he had already made his decision about who was telling the truth. "Miss," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "we seem to have a situation here. Mrs. Whitmore is one of our most valued customers. To avoid any further delay or disruption, I am going to ask you to accept a seat in economy. We will, of course, refund the difference in fare after the flight." It was not a request. It was a command dressed in polite language. Zara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Captain, with all due respect, I have proof that I booked and paid for this specific seat weeks ago. I have the confirmation email, the credit card charge, everything. This is not about customer service. This is discrimination." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Captain Mills's expression hardened. Young lady, I do not appreciate accusations. This is about resolving a seating conflict efficiently. It has nothing to do with race. The fact that he brought up race when Zara had not specifically mentioned it told her everything she needed to know. Diane jumped in her voice, taking on an edge of impatience. We have other passengers waiting to board. You are causing a significant delay. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have to ask you to deplane. Zara looked around the cabin desperately. Surely someone would speak up, would point out the obvious injustice happening in front of them. But the other passengers avoided her gaze. Some looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Others seemed annoyed, as if she was the problem for not quietly accepting her demotion. One man in a business suit called out, "Just move already. Some of us have connections to make." And a woman 2 rows back added, "Why is this taking so long? The seat does not matter that much." But it did matter. It mattered more than they could possibly understand. This was not about a seat. This was about being seen as less than about being assumed guilty, about having to prove your humanity over and over while others got the benefit of the doubt automatically. Mrs. Whitmore stood and walked confidently to seat 2A, settling in with a satisfied smile. She arranged her belongings in the seat pocket, claimed the armrests, and pulled out a magazine. The message was clear. She had won. Diane held out a new boarding pass, this one for seat 32B economy. Middle seat, the worst seat on the plane. We need to complete boarding, Diane said, her voice now openly impatient. Take this seat or leave the aircraft. Those are your options. Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She refused to give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her hand shook as she reached for her backpack. Maybe she should just take the economy seat. Maybe fighting was not worth it. Maybe her father was wrong, and excellence was not enough. Maybe nothing would ever be enough. As she lifted her bag, she heard Mrs. Whitmore's voice, not quite a whisper, clearly meant to be overheard. "Thank you, dear," she said to Diane. "I do not know why they let people like that in first class. My husband is a senator, you know. We have standards to maintain. People like that." The words cut through Zara like a knife, sharp and precise. Standards to maintain. As if Zara's presence degraded the very air in first class. Diane laughed, a light tinkling sound that made Zara's blood boil. "I completely understand, Mrs. Whitmore. We will make sure you are comfortable for the entire flight." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. Zara stopped walking. Her hand, which had been clutching her backpack strap, moved to her phone instead. She had tried to be independent. She had tried to handle this herself. But this was not about pride anymore. This was about justice. Her father had taught her that asking for help was not weakness. Using your resources was not cheating. Silence in the face of injustice was complicity. With trembling fingers, she pulled up her favorites and pressed the first contact, Dad. But before we find out what happens when a billionaire gets a call from his daughter who is being discriminated against, I need to ask you something. Comment the number 1 right now if you think Zara did the right thing by calling her father. Comment 2 if you think she should have just moved to economy to avoid the conflict. And while you are at it, smash that like button if you have ever felt judged or discriminated against based on how you look. Subscribe, because what happens next is absolutely wild, and you do not want to miss a single second. Seriously, the next part of this story will give you chills. So what do you think happened when Trevor Bennett answered that call? Keep watching. The phone rang once. Trevor Bennett was in the middle of a board meeting at Bennett Tech Industries headquarters in San Francisco, reviewing quarterly projections with a room full of executives. He glanced at his phone, saw it was Zara, and his first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. She was supposed to be in school. But something made him look twice at the time. Tuesday afternoon. She should be in chemistry class. Zara never called during school hours unless something was wrong. He held up one finger to pause the CFO mid-sentence and answered, "Baby girl, everything okay?" The sound that came through the line made his blood freeze. It was Zara's voice, but smaller, shakier on the edge of tears. "Daddy, I need help." In the background, he could hear voices, the ambient noise of an aircraft, and then clear as day, a woman saying, "We have standards to maintain." Trevor stood so abruptly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Every executive in the room stopped talking, startled by the sudden movement. They watched as their normally composed CEO's face transformed into something cold and dangerous. "Where are you?" His voice was deadly calm. Zara's words tumbled out between shaky breaths. She told him everything: the check-in counter, the security guards, the boarding pass, verification, Diane, Mrs. Whitmore, the demand that she move to economy, the accusations, the humiliation. Trevor listened in absolute silence, his jaw clenching tighter with each sentence. When she finished, he asked 3 questions in rapid succession. What airline? Flight number? Name of the flight attendant? Zara provided all 3. In the background, Trevor could hear Diane's voice again. "Miss, you need to move now, or we will have security remove you." Trevor's response was immediate and absolute. "Baby girl, listen to me very carefully. Do not move. Do not go anywhere. Do not leave that airplane. Daddy's got this. Stay exactly where you are. Do you understand me?" Zara's voice was tiny. "Okay. I love you. This ends right now." Trevor hung up and turned to his assistant who had entered during the call. "Get me the CEO of this airline on the phone immediately. I do not care what meeting they are in. Tell them Trevor Bennett is calling about a civil rights violation involving my daughter, and if I do not have them on the phone in 5 minutes, I am going to the media, the FAA, and every lawyer I have on retainer." His assistant, who had worked for Trevor for 8 years and had never seen him this furious, practically ran from the room. Trevor then called his head of aviation. "Fire up the G650. Flight plan to LAX immediately. I do not care about clearances. I do not care about schedules. I want wheels up in 10 minutes. And Sasunsun. Sir, we do not have an arrival slot at LAX. The commercial traffic is..." "Then create one. Block a taxiway if you have to. I am coming and nothing is going to stop me." On the aircraft, Zara stood frozen in the aisle phone clutched to her chest. Diane advanced on her with barely concealed irritation. "I do not know who you are calling, but this is your final warning. Sit down in your assigned economy seat right now, or I am calling security to have you removed from this aircraft for disruptive behavior." Disruptive behavior. Zara almost laughed at the absurdity. She had not raised her voice once. She had not cursed or threatened anyone. She had simply insisted on sitting in the seat she had paid for while being black. Apparently, that counted as disruption. Mrs. Whitmore added her voice to the chorus. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Captain, can we please just remove her and get on with the flight? Some of us have important appointments." Several other passengers murmured agreement. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is crazy," she narrated for her social media followers. "This girl is holding up the whole flight arguing about a seat." Within seconds, multiple phones were out, all pointed at Zara. She was about to become a viral video, but not in the way these people expected. Captain Mills returned to the cabin, his patience clearly exhausted. "Miss, I am going to ask you one final time. Take the seat we have provided in economy or leave the aircraft. If you refuse, you will be banned from this airline and possibly charged with interfering with a flight crew. What is your decision?" It was a threat designed to intimidate to make her back down. Zara felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. She felt the judgment, the assumption of guilt, the certainty from everyone around her that she was the problem. But she also felt her phone in her hand, and she heard her father's voice in her head. "Do not move. Stay exactly where you are." So she lifted her chin and said with as much dignity as she could muster, "I am staying right here." The cabin erupted. Passengers groaned, complained, demanded she be thrown off. Mrs. Whitmore's voice rose above the others. "This is outrageous! Remove her this instant!" Captain Mills pulled out his radio. "Ground crew, we need security to gate 17 for a passenger removal." Diane smirked triumph written across her face. Zara closed her eyes and waited for security to arrive, to escort her off in handcuffs, probably to add arrested to her humiliation. But that is not what happened. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Trevor's assistant burst back into the conference room. "Sir, I have the CEO on line 1. He is not happy about being pulled out of a meeting." Trevor picked up the phone with deliberate slowness. "This is Trevor Bennett. I understand you run this airline." The CEO's voice came through with barely masked irritation. "Mr. Bennett, I am not sure what this is about, but disrupting my schedule for what sounds like a customer service issue is highly irregular." "Customer service?" Trevor repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Is that what you call racial discrimination? My 17-year-old daughter is currently being threatened with arrest on one of your aircraft because your staff refused to believe a black teenager could afford first class. She has proof of purchase, proof of booking, and proof of payment, but your people chose to believe a white woman instead. Now I am going to give you one chance to fix this before I make it my life's mission to destroy your company. Do you understand me?" There was a pause. The CEO clearly had not been briefed on the full situation. "Mr. Bennett, I am sure there has been a misunderstanding. These situations happen. We will offer your daughter compensation and—" "Compensation." Trevor's laugh was cold. "You think this is about money? I am worth $4.7 billion. I do not need your compensation. What I need is for you to keep that aircraft on the ground until I get there, fire everyone involved, and issue a public apology." Another pause. Then, "Sir, I cannot hold a commercial flight because of a seating dispute. We have 300 passengers on board. Then you have 300 witnesses to a civil rights violation. Keep the plane grounded or I will park my jet on your runway, and you can explain to the FAA why you prioritized schedule over addressing discrimination. Your choice." The CEO's voice hardened. "Mr. Bennett, I understand you are upset, but you cannot make demands like this. We have protocols." And Trevor hung up. The CEO had made his choice. Time to make good on the threat. He called his pilot. "What is our ETA to LAX?" 18 minutes, sir, but we do not have clearance to land. LAX is saying commercial traffic takes priority." "Block the main taxiway to Terminal 4. I do not care what clearance they gave us. I want our jet between that aircraft and the runway." "Sir, that will cause significant disruption. We could lose our operating license." Trevor's voice was absolute. "Do it. If they want to revoke my license, they can. But my daughter is not spending one more second being humiliated on that plane." "Yes, sir." As the private jet streaked toward Los Angeles inside Flight 447, the ground crew arrived. 2 security officers boarded, looking uncomfortable with the situation. They approached Zara, who stood perfectly still, hands visible, phone still clutched tightly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one officer said. His voice was not unkind, but his job was clear. Before Zara could respond, before Diane could deliver her victory speech, before Mrs. Whitmore could make another smug comment, something happened that changed everything. The aircraft engines, which had been powering up for pushback, suddenly went silent. Every light on the plane flickered. Captain Mills's voice came over the intercom, confused and irritated. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated. But the passengers were not remaining seated. Those by the windows were pointing outside, gasps and exclamations spreading through the cabin like wildfire. What is that? Is that jet blocking us? Oh my God, look at that plane! Even the security officers turned to look. Zara moved to the nearest window. What she saw made her heart soar. A Gulfstream G650, glossy black with chrome accents, had positioned itself directly across the taxiway. It was not just near them, it was blocking them. Completely. Deliberately. And on the side of the fuselage, impossible to miss, gleamed the logo and name Bennett Tech Industries. Around her, passengers were pulling out phones, frantically Googling. Bennett Tech, that is the software company. Holy God, is that Trevor Bennett's plane? Wait, Trevor Bennett, the billionaire. Captain Mills emerged from the cockpit, his face pale. He grabbed Diane's arm and pulled her aside, but his whispered words carried in the suddenly silent cabin. Do you know who her father is? Diane shook her head, looking increasingly panicked. That is Trevor Bennett's daughter. Trevor Bennett. He is worth nearly $5 billion and his private jet just blocked our takeoff. All the color drained from Diane's face. She looked at Zara with new eyes, seeing her not as a black teenager who did not belong in first class, but as someone whose father had just weaponized his wealth and power to protect her. The radio in Captain Mills's hand crackled to life. The voice was male professional and absolutely uncompromising. LAX ground control to flight 447. You are to hold position. Do not attempt to move. Bennett Private Aircraft has filed an emergency priority clearance regarding a civil rights incident aboard your vessel, Mr. Trevor Bennett is requesting immediate communication with your captain regarding passenger Zara Bennett and allegations of racial discrimination. This is not a request. This is a directive. Acknowledge. Every person in first class turned to stare at Zara. The security officers stepped back, suddenly unsure of their role. Mrs. Whitmore's face went through several shades of red before settling on a kind of mottled purple. The passengers who had been recording, hoping to capture a disruptive passenger being removed, suddenly realized they had captured something entirely different. They had documented a civil rights violation, and now the victim's billionaire father had shut down LAX operations to address it. Zara allowed herself a small smile. Her father had not just come through. He had made a statement that could not be ignored. Captain Mills pressed the radio button with a shaking hand. Ground control, this is Captain Mills of Flight 447. We acknowledge. Standing by for communication with Mr. Bennett. The radio crackled again. Mr. Bennett's aircraft is on approach. He will board your aircraft upon arrival. In the meantime, he has requested that all involved parties remain on board. This includes flight attendant Diane Hartwell, Captain Roger Mills, and passenger Catherine Whitmore. No one is to leave the aircraft until this matter is resolved. It was not a request. It was a command backed by enough money and power to make LAX itself bend to his will. Mrs. Whitmore stood abruptly. This is absurd. I demand to speak to your supervisor. But Captain Mills was not listening to her anymore. He was staring at Zara with something between horror and regret, finally understanding what he had enabled. Around the cabin, passengers who had been so quick to judge Zara were now frantically deleting videos, panic setting in, as they realized they had participated in or at least witnessed something that could come back to haunt them. The woman who had live-streamed earlier was desperately trying to end her broadcast, but the internet never forgets. One man who had shouted at Zara to just move sank low in his seat, hoping to become invisible. Diane stood frozen, her career flashing before her eyes. 15 years of service, thousands of flights, and it was about to end because she had made an assumption based on skin color. She tried to speak to Zara, her voice breaking. "Miss Bennett, I did not know. I am so sorry. If I had known who you were." Zara turned to her with cold eyes. "If you had known I was rich, would that have made a difference? Should it have too? What about all the other black passengers who do not have billionaire fathers? Do they not deserve the same respect?" Diane had no answer, because they both knew the truth. If Zara had been poor, if she had not had a powerful father, she would have been escorted off that plane in handcuffs, humiliated, possibly arrested, and nothing would have changed. The system would have continued grinding along, crushing people who looked like her under the weight of assumptions and prejudice. But today was different. Today the system had messed with the wrong girl. The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. Other flights were being delayed because of the blocked taxiway. The airline's social media was exploding with reports of the incident. News helicopters were beginning to circle, having picked up on police scanners that something unusual was happening at LAX, involving a private jet and a civil rights issue. Then, precisely 23 minutes after that initial call, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up to the aircraft. The door opened, and Trevor Bennett stepped out. Trevor Bennett did not look like someone who had just scrambled a private jet, shut down part of LAX, and was about to unleash legal hell on a major airline. He looked calm. He wore a charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, a crisp white shirt and a burgundy tie. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He was a tall man, 52 years old, with close-cropped hair graying at the temples, and the kind of presence that made people automatically defer to him. Behind him came 3 lawyers in equally expensive suits, each carrying briefcases and tablets. Behind them, a video crew. Professional cameras, boom mics, the works. This was not just a father picking up his daughter. This was a documented intervention. Trevor walked up the jet bridge with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the world because he had bought it. Every second this plane sat grounded was costing the airline thousands of dollars. Good. He stepped onto the aircraft, and the cabin fell into absolute silence. Trevor's eyes scanned the first-class cabin, taking in Captain Mills, Diane, Mrs. Whitmore, the security officers, and all the passengers who had been so eager to judge his daughter. Then he saw Zara still standing in the aisle, still holding her ground, and his expression softened for just a moment. "Hey, baby girl," he said quietly. Zara's composure finally cracked. She ran to her father, and he wrapped her in his arms, holding her tight, while she shook with suppressed sobs. "I am sorry," she whispered against his suit jacket. "I wanted to do this on my own. I wanted to prove I could handle it." Trevor pulled back just enough to look at his daughter's face. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. What happened here is not your fault. It is theirs." He said the last word while looking directly at Diane and Captain Mills. Then he turned to address the entire cabin. "My name is Trevor Bennett. That is my daughter Zara Bennett, 17 years old, straight-A student, taking advanced placement courses, currently applying to MIT. She is flying to New York today for an admissions interview. She booked and paid for seat 2A in first class 3 weeks ago, using her own money from her summer job. She has every right to be on this aircraft in that seat." One of the lawyers stepped forward, a woman with silver hair and steel in her eyes. She held up a tablet. "This is a certified copy of Miss Bennett's booking made on November 15th at 2:37 p.m. Pacific Time. Confirmation number Delta 77 Mike 42 Alpha. Seat assignment 2A. Payment confirmed via Visa, ending in 6644. This information was readily available in your system. She turned the tablet to show Captain Mills and Diane. They looked, but said nothing. What could they say? The lawyer continued, her voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. This, she held up another tablet, is Mrs. Catherine Whitmore's booking, made on December 2nd at 11:15 a.m. Pacific Time. 5 days ago. Seat assignment 2A. The system should have flagged this as a conflict and resolved it based on booking priority, which clearly belongs to Miss Bennett. Instead, your staff chose to believe Mrs. Whitmore and attempted to forcibly remove Miss Bennett to economy class. Can you explain why? Diane opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. There was confusion in the system. You thought what? Trevor's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. You thought a black girl could not afford first class. You thought she must have made a mistake. You thought she was lying. Diane's face crumpled. I was not thinking about race. You just what? Trevor stepped closer. You just saw a teenager in a hoodie and jeans and made an assumption. Meanwhile, you saw Mrs. Whitmore in designer clothes and made a different assumption. That is the definition of prejudice. You treated them differently based on appearance and, let's be honest, race. Mrs. Whitmore finally found her voice. Now see here, I did not ask for this. I simply claimed my seat. The second lawyer, a black man about Trevor's age, turned to her. Your seat. The seat you booked 5 days ago versus the seat Miss Bennett booked 3 weeks ago. Ma'am, you are a platinum member. You have flown this airline for years. You know how seating priority works. You knew or should have known that a more recent booking does not override an earlier one. Yet you insisted this was your seat and demanded Miss Bennett be removed. Why? Mrs. Whitmore spluttered. I always sit in 2A. It is my preference. Preference does not override prior booking. You know that. So again, why did you feel entitled to take a seat that was not yours? The cabin had become an impromptu courtroom, and Mrs. Whitmore was on trial. She looked around for support, but found none. The other passengers avoided her gaze. My husband is a senator, she said, as if rank and power explained everything. Your husband's position does not give you the right to discriminate, the lawyer replied. In fact, it makes your behavior more egregious. You used your perceived status to bully a teenager out of a seat that legally belonged to her. Trevor held up a hand, and both lawyers stepped back. Let me make something very clear to everyone on this aircraft. What happened here today is not just an airline customer service failure. It is a civil rights violation. My daughter was discriminated against based on her race. She was questioned repeatedly about her ticket. She was accused of fraud without evidence. She was threatened with arrest for the crime of sitting in a seat she paid for while black. Every single person who participated in this, who stood by and said nothing, who recorded it for social media entertainment, is complicit. He let that sink in, watching faces turn red, watching people shrink in their seats. I am a black man who has built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing. I have faced discrimination my entire life. But I thought maybe foolishly that my daughter would face less of it. That by giving her every advantage, every opportunity, she would be insulated from the worst of it. Today proved me wrong. Today proved that no matter how successful I become, no matter how much money I have, my daughter will still be seen as suspicious, as not belonging, as someone who needs to prove her right to exist in spaces that white people occupy without question. The cabin was silent. Trevor turned to Captain Mills. You had a choice. You could have looked at the evidence, seen that my daughter had clear priority, and resolved this properly. Instead, you chose to believe Mrs. Whitmore without question and threaten my daughter with removal. That is not customer service. That is discrimination. Trevor pulled out his phone and placed a call on speaker. After 2 rings, a voice answered. "This is Charles Hoffman." "Charles it is, Trevor. I am on board Flight 447 at LAX. I have 3 witnesses' video documentation and about 200 passengers who can confirm what I am about to tell you." Charles Hoffman was the CEO of the airline, the same man who had dismissed Trevor's earlier call. His voice now carried a very different tone. "Trevor, I have been briefed on the situation. I want to assure you that we take these allegations very seriously, and you did not take them seriously an hour ago when I called you. You told me you could not hold a commercial flight for a seating dispute, so I held it myself. Now you are going to listen." Trevor's voice was cold. "Flight attendant Diane Hartwell will be terminated immediately. Captain Roger Mills will be suspended pending a full investigation, and I expect termination. Catherine Whitmore will be banned from this airline for disruptive behavior, and you will issue a public apology to my daughter and announce a complete overhaul of your staff training regarding implicit bias and racial discrimination." Charles Hoffman tried to negotiate. "Trevor, those are significant actions. Perhaps we could discuss compensation, a settlement, something that addresses your concerns without such drastic—" "No." The word was final. "This is not about money. This is about accountability. This is about making sure no other black child has to stand in an airplane aisle surrounded by people who assume they are lying, feeling like they do not belong. You will do what I have asked, or I will spend the next decade making sure everyone knows your airline tolerates discrimination. I will fund lawsuits for every person who has faced similar treatment. I will buy enough stock to force board changes. I will make this my personal mission. Do you understand me?" There was a long pause. "I understand. We will comply with your requests." "Not requests, requirements. I want confirmation in writing within the hour. And I want your head of HR to contact my office by end of business today to discuss the new training program, which my company will be happy to develop and provide free of charge." "Agreed." Trevor hung up without saying goodbye. He turned to Diane, who was crying silently. "Miss Hartwell, I take no pleasure in this, but actions have consequences. You made assumptions based on my daughter's appearance and race. You refused to look at evidence. You threatened her with arrest. Those choices cost you your career. I hope you learn from this." Diane tried to speak, her voice broken. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not realize." "That is the problem," Trevor said quietly. "You did not think. You operated on autopilot bias. And when someone challenged you, you doubled down instead of examining your assumptions. That is how discrimination persists. Good people making bad assumptions and refusing to question themselves." Security was called not to remove Zara, but to escort Diane off the aircraft. She gathered her belongings with shaking hands, avoiding everyone's eyes. As she walked past Zara, she stopped. "I truly am sorry. What I did was wrong. I will do better." Zara looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I hope you do." Mrs. Whitmore was next. She gathered her designer bags with furious dignity, insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that her husband would hear about this, that she had rights. But as security escorted her off, her threats rang hollow. The video was already going viral. Her husband's office would be fielding calls within the hour. Then Trevor did something unexpected. He addressed the entire cabin. "Some of you filmed what happened. Some of you laughed and made jokes. Some of you told my daughter to just move, just comply, just make it easier for everyone. I want you to think about that. Think about how quick you were to assume she was the problem. Think about how you would feel if it was your daughter, your sister, your friend. Discrimination persists because good people stay silent. Because it is easier to go along than to speak up. Because we tell ourselves it is not our problem. He paused, letting his words sink in. But it is your problem. It is everyone's problem. Because silence is complicity. Today, you all witnessed something wrong, and most of you did nothing. Some of you made it worse. I want you to carry that with you. The cabin remained silent. Then slowly a man about Trevor's age stood up. He was white, well-dressed, and he looked ashamed. Mr. Bennett, I owe your daughter an apology. I was one of the people who told her to just move. I did not want to get involved. I did not want my flight delayed. I was thinking about myself, not about what was right. I am sorry, Zara. You deserved better. You deserved someone to stand up with you. His voice cracked. I am ashamed that I did not. Trevor nodded at him. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when you are wrong. The man sat down, and for a moment no one else moved. Then a woman in her 30s stood. I recorded a video and posted it making fun of the situation. I have deleted it and posted an apology. What I did was wrong. Another passenger stood. I did not say anything, but I should have. I could see what was happening, and I stayed quiet because I did not want confrontation. I am sorry. One by one, passengers stood and apologized. Not all of them. Some remained seated stubborn in their denial, or simply unwilling to admit fault. But enough stood that the message was clear. Witnesses to injustice had a choice about what to do next. When the apologies ended, Trevor looked at his daughter. Baby girl, this is your moment. What do you want to happen now? Zara, who had been silent through all of this, finally spoke. Her voice was stronger now, not the trembling whisper from earlier. I want to sit in the seat I paid for. And I want my dad to sit next to me for the flight to New York. Can you do that, Dad? Trevor smiled. I would be honored. One of the lawyers handed the new captain who had just arrived to replace Captain Mills a boarding pass for Trevor. Seat 2B, right next to Zara. As Trevor and Zara settled into their seats, the cabin slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. The new flight crew, visibly shaken by what they had walked into, worked efficiently and professionally. The flight was delayed by 2 hours and 40 minutes, but it would continue. As the aircraft finally pushed back and taxied toward the runway, Zara looked out the window at her father's private jet, still parked where it had blocked them. That is quite a statement, Dad. Trevor took her hand. You are my daughter. You are more important than any schedule, any business deal, any amount of money. If I have to shut down every airport in America to protect you from discrimination, I will do it every single time. The flight to New York was quiet. Zara and Trevor talked about what had happened about the MIT interview. Zara almost missed about independence and when it is right to ask for help. I wanted to handle it myself, Zara admitted as the plane crossed into Nevada airspace. I wanted to prove I did not need your name, your money, your protection. I wanted to be just Zara, not Trevor Bennett's daughter. Her father squeezed her hand. Baby girl, being independent does not mean suffering discrimination in silence. It does not mean accepting injustice because standing up for yourself might look like using privilege. You had every right to call me. You had every right to use whatever resources were available. The fact that you tried to handle it alone first shows strength. The fact that you knew when to ask for help shows wisdom. Zara leaned against her father's shoulder. It just feels like cheating sometimes. Like I am using your power instead of earning my own. And Trevor was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I built my company from nothing. Started in my garage, wrote code 18 hours a day, lived on ramen and ambition. I know what earning success feels like. But here is what I learned. Success is not just about what you achieve. It is about what you do with it. If I have power, and I do not use it to protect my family, to fight injustice, to make the world a little bit better, then what was the point? My wealth means nothing if my daughter has to face discrimination alone. He shifted to look at her directly. You are brilliant, Zara. You are going to get into MIT on your own merit. Your grades, your test scores, your achievements, those are yours. But the world is not fair. You know that now more than ever. And when the world is unfair, using every tool available to fight back is not weakness. It is strategy. Zara nodded slowly. Mrs. Whitmore, the senator's wife, she used her husband's position all the time. She thought it made her special entitled. I do not want to be like that. You won't be, Trevor assured her, because you understand the difference. She used status to take what was not hers. You used resources to keep what was rightfully yours. She punched down. You stood up. That is the difference. The plane landed at JFK 5 hours late. Zara had missed her scheduled MIT interview, but Trevor had made some calls. They were willing to reschedule. More than willing. The story was already national news. By the time they landed, it had exploded across social media with the hashtag SeatGate trending worldwide. News outlets were calling it a watershed moment in discussions about racism in air travel. Civil rights organizations were praising Trevor's response. The airline's stock had dropped 6%. 2 weeks later, the fallout continued. Diane Hartwell gave an interview to a major news network, tearful and apologetic, talking about how she had never considered herself racist, but now realized how deeply bias had affected her actions. She had enrolled in diversity training and was volunteering with organizations that fought discrimination. Captain Roger Mills was terminated after the investigation revealed 3 previous complaints about bias that had been dismissed as personality conflicts. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore faced a different kind of consequence. The video of her "people like that" comment went viral. Her husband, Senator James Whitmore, faced calls to resign. His political opponents used the incident in attack ads. The Whitmores issued a public apology, but the damage was done. Catherine Whitmore became the face of casual entitled racism, her name synonymous with the kind of discrimination that hides behind politeness and pearl necklaces. The airline overhauled its entire training program, implementing what they called the Bennett Protocol, a comprehensive system for handling discrimination complaints and bias incidents. Trevor's company developed the training materials free of charge, and they became industry standard within months. But the biggest change happened with Zara. 3 months after the incident, she stood on a stage at a civil rights conference in Chicago. The room held 500 people, from activists to politicians to students like her. She wore a blue dress her father said made her look professional, but kept her sneakers because she argued comfort mattered. Trevor sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Zara stepped up to the microphone. Her hands did not shake this time. Good afternoon. My name is Zara Bennett, and 3 months ago I almost let discrimination win. She told the story, every detail, from the check-in counter to her father's jet blocking the runway. The audience hung on every word. When she reached the part about standing in the aisle feeling alone and humiliated, some people wiped away tears. When she described her father's arrival, the room erupted in applause. But Zara raised a hand for quiet. Here is what I want you to understand. What happened to me made national news because my father has money and power. But this happens every day to people who do not have those resources. Black passengers are removed from planes for speaking another language, for existing in first class, for the crime of making white passengers uncomfortable. This is not new. It is just newly visible because I had a father who could force the world to pay attention." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I learned something that day. I learned that silence enables injustice. When those passengers sat quietly while I was being discriminated against, they chose comfort over courage. When Diane made assumptions based on my skin color instead of the evidence in front of her, she chose bias over truth. When Captain Mills threatened me with arrest instead of examining the facts, he chose authority over justice. Every person in that chain made a choice, and those choices added up to discrimination." Zara's voice grew stronger. "But here is the thing about choices. We get to make them every day. When you see injustice, you can speak up or stay silent. When you have power, you can use it to protect the vulnerable or to protect your own comfort. When you have privilege, you can examine your biases or defend them. My father did not just save me from humiliation that day. He taught me that when you have power, you use it to protect those who do not. That when you see something wrong, you do something about it. That money and success are meaningless if you do not use them to make the world more just." She looked directly at the audience. "I am 17 years old. In a few months, I will start at MIT studying computer science and artificial intelligence. My dream is to create technology that reduces bias, that makes systems more fair, that catches discrimination before it happens. That is going to be my life's work. But right now today, my work is using my voice. The voice that was almost silenced on that airplane. The voice that my father amplified when he shut down LAX to protect me. I am using that voice to tell you that this cannot continue. We cannot live in a world where my value depends on my father's bank account, where I am believed or dismissed based on my skin color, where justice is a luxury good available only to those who can afford private jets." The room was absolutely silent. Some people criticized my father. They said he was showing off, flexing his wealth, that he should have handled it quietly through legal channels. But here is what those critics do not understand. Quiet has not worked. Quiet is how discrimination persists. Quiet is how Diane and Captain Mills and Mrs. Whitmore got away with it for years. Loud is what changes things. Disruptive is what changes things. Shutting down an airport, making it inconvenient, making it impossible to ignore, that is what changes things. Zara smiled, and it was her father's smile, confident and determined. "So I am going to keep being loud. I am going to keep being disruptive. I am going to keep demanding that the world treat people like me with the respect we deserve, not because of who our parents are, but because we are human beings. And I am asking you to join me. The next time you see discrimination, speak up. The next time you hear someone make an assumption based on race, challenge it. The next time you have a choice between comfort and courage, choose courage." She finished with words that would be quoted in articles and speeches for years to come. That day on the airplane taught me something crucial. My father did not just protect me. He showed me how to protect myself and others. He showed me that silence is complicity, and that those with power have a responsibility to use it for good. Today, I am using my voice. Tomorrow, I will use my education. And someday I will use my success to make sure no other kid has to call their parent from an airplane aisle crying because they are being treated as less than human. Because everyone deserves to sit in the seat they paid for. Everyone deserves to be believed when they tell the truth. Everyone deserves dignity. That is not a privilege. That is a right. And I am going to spend my life making sure that right is protected. The room erupted in a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. Trevor stood with everyone else, tears streaming down his face. proud beyond words. When Zara stepped off the stage, she walked straight to her father, and he pulled her into a fierce hug. "That was perfect, baby girl. I learned from the best dad." As they left the conference center, a young black girl, maybe 13, approached nervously. "Miss Bennett, can I take a picture with you?" Zara smiled. "Of course." As they posed, the girl whispered, "Thank you for not backing down. My mom showed me the video. You made me feel like I can stand up too." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "You can. You absolutely can. And if you ever need help, you ask for it. Promise me." The girl nodded solemnly. "I promise." That night, back in their hotel room, Trevor and Zara ordered room service and watched the conference coverage on the news. The story had grown beyond SeatGate. It had become part of a larger national conversation about race privilege and justice. "Do you think anything will really change?" Zara asked. Trevor considered the question carefully. "I think change happens slowly then, all at once. For years, people knew discrimination in air travel was happening, but it was easy to ignore. You made it impossible to ignore. That matters. Will it solve everything? No. But it is a step. And sometimes one step is enough to start a journey." Zara nodded, thinking about MIT, about her plans, about the future she was going to build. "I am glad you came for me, Dad. I am glad you did not let them win." "Baby girl," Trevor said softly. "They were never going to win. Because you are my daughter, and we do not accept injustice. Not quietly. Not ever." 6 months later, Zara walked across the MIT campus for the first time as an official student. She had been accepted with a full scholarship based on merit, her essay about the airplane incident, and what it taught her about systemic bias resonating with the admissions committee. She was planning to major in computer science with a focus on ethical AI. Her first semester project, an algorithm to detect and flag potential discrimination in customer service interactions. She called it Project Fair Skies. And in that moment, walking through MIT's corridors with her head held high, Zara Bennett understood something profound. That day on the airplane had tried to make her smaller, to put her in her place, to teach her that people who looked like her did not belong in first class. Instead, it had made her bigger, louder, more determined. It had given her a purpose and a voice, and she would never be silenced again. So what do you think about Zara's story? Comment below and tell me. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination? How did you handle it? And here is a bigger question. If you had been on that plane, would you have spoken up for Zara? Be honest with yourself. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Smash that like button if this story moved you or made you think differently about standing up against injustice. Subscribe to this channel because we share more powerful, true stories that need to be heard, stories that challenge us to be better. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, that standing up is always worth it, even when it is scary. Thank you for watching, and remember, your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not up for debate. And when the world tries to put you in a box, you have every right to break out of it with all the force necessary. Stay strong, stay loud, and never let anyone make you feel like you do not belong. Until next time, Zara's experience teaches us profound truths about discrimination and courage in modern America. First, bias often operates unconsciously. Diane Hartwell likely never considered herself racist, yet her assumptions about who belongs in first class were rooted in racial prejudice. This implicit bias affects decisions daily, from airplane seats to job interviews to housing applications. Second, documentation matters. Zara had proof of her booking confirmation emails and payment records. When facing discrimination, evidence becomes your strongest ally. Third, silence enables injustice. The passengers who witnessed Zara's humiliation but said nothing became complicit through their inaction. Speaking up requires courage, but staying silent perpetuates harm. Fourth, using available resources is not weakness. Zara initially resisted calling her father, viewing it as failure. She learned that asking for help when facing systemic injustice is strategic, not shameful. Fifth, accountability drives change. Trevor did not accept apologies and move on. He demanded concrete consequences, terminations, policy changes, and public acknowledgement. Without accountability, discrimination continues unchecked. Finally, privilege carries responsibility. Trevor used his wealth and power not for personal gain, but to protect his daughter and create systemic change. Those with resources have an obligation to use them for justice. Zara's story reminds us that discrimination thrives in silence and comfort, but withers under the light of exposure and the force of accountability. What would you have done if you were on that plane? Would you have spoken up for Zara? Or would fear of confrontation kept you silent? Drop a comment below and be honest with yourself, because growth starts with self-awareness. Have you or someone you love experienced discrimination based on appearance or race? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and your experience could help someone else feel less alone. If Zara's courage inspired you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel because we bring you real stories about real people standing up against injustice, stories that challenge us to be better humans. And here is the most important part: share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear that their dignity is non-negotiable, that standing up is always worth it, that they deserve respect, regardless of who their parents are or how much money they have. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring enough to stick around until the end. Remember, silence enables discrimination, but your voice, your actions, and your courage can change the world. Stay strong, stand tall, and never let anyone make you feel like you do not belong. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.